Welcome to The Digital Director, a podcast for insights on leadership, innovation, and the digital transformation that's reshaping how we work and live. I'm your host, Daniel Innovate, and today's episode features a dynamic conversation with Mark Cleveland, a true parallel entrepreneur. Mark lives the parallel path, simultaneously building, scaling, and selling businesses across diverse industries like satellite systems, logistics, consumer goods, and software. He's launched and exited multiple ventures over the last 3 decades and now serves as managing director at Kensington Park Capital, guiding founders through the complexities of growth and exit strategies.
All right. Hey, what's up, Mark? How are you?
Good to see you, Daniel. My favorite last name. Somebody goes by the name of Innovate.
Thanks so much for coming on. Basically, episode 1 of The Digital Director, design, communications, technology, and a few other kind of topics. But I love meeting people like you, and I met you in such an interesting way. And from the moment that we spoke, I knew that we'd be talking again. And so thank you so much for coming on the show. You are the founder of a concept, I guess you've coined the parallel entrepreneur. And what does that mean?
I think I coined the term parallel entrepreneur, and I'm reviving the word paralleling, or enjoying the experience of reliving my entrepreneurial journey, my lived journey, and sort of uncovering how is it and why is it, and aren't there other people who also run more than one company at the same time, start a new company while they've got 2 that are consuming most people's attention. How do people do that? So I've been what I consider to be a parallel entrepreneur most of my adult life, most of my business life. But the concept has been studied very, very lightly, and it deserves more attention. Oftentimes, people would call it a portfolio entrepreneur, which I think gets confused with venture capital and portfolio investments. It's not the same thing, I don't believe, as what I'm experiencing, but that's a term that has been used. And I've heard the term multipreneur before. I've heard the term multitasker applied to just about everything that I find to be a superpower. And yeah, I guess I coined it because I didn't feel serial entrepreneur applied to me, because I don't do things in one straight line. I tend to follow my passions and put things in motion and build organizations, and those organizations become companies, and I have more than one at the same time, and I'm looking for synergies all the time.
That's great. I can definitely resonate with that. And I want to dig deeper on that in a moment. But I do want to kind of ask you more about like your history, like where'd you grow up, and like how'd you get into entrepreneurship, and you're also in the M&A business. So tell us a little bit about how you kind of transformed into that.
Oh, big, deep question. I grew up in Oregon, went to University of Oregon. I consider myself a legitimate tree hugger, and I'm very concerned about how we're treating our environment and our future. So some of the companies that I've gotten involved with have been related and deeply rooted in that belief that we can do something individually, and our business lives should reflect our priorities. I started a satellite communications company when I was right out of college, and a software development company shortly after that. And eventually I got into the transportation, logistics, and information systems business, pursued that career for a long time, and bought and sold some companies along the way. Decided I wanted to get into manufacturing. I think the common thread here is that once I become expert in something, the joy and thrill of learning, the return on that learning investment isn't as high. And so I want to continue to press my edges and learn something new. So I've gone from satellite communications to software development to fleet transportation services to maritime operations. I started with a team of people always involved, not just when I say I'm talking about the team. Put together U.S. domestic brown water short sea shipping company. And we took container on barge uh, from Brownsville to Tampa and from Tampa back to Brownsville. Um, studying transportation and logistics throughout a 30-year career in that space, largely focused on information systems, but paying attention to how things move, what things are moving, all the way from data to bicycles to socks. So I wanted to get into manufacturing because I wanted to learn about manufacturing. I did that for 8 years or so. I feel like I've got about an 8 or 9 year clock on just about everything. If you look back at the pattern, I'll buy a company, I'll sell a company, I'll start a company. Once in a while, I'll close a company. But the lessons are many. The adventure is significant, and I'm learning constantly. And I think it just makes me a better decision maker. It helps me see patterns in 3 dimensions instead of 2 dimensions. And, the idea or the appearance of risk, fear doesn't drive me. It's about opportunity, love, and learning.
That's awesome. Um, Man, there's so many stories there, so much to unpack, and you've had so many, kind of companies come and go over the last few years. What do you say to the people that are constantly preaching, "Oh, you have to focus on one thing and one thing only"? And so, like, what's your take on that?
I have children, and I think those of you who out there listening have 2 or 3 kids, you can really see the personalities of your children emerge independently. Some of it has to do with environment, some of it has to do with DNA, some of it just has to do with whatever love got injected to them at the moment they were born. And companies have personalities and they're alive, just like your kids are. And I think for me to tell my oldest daughter, focus, focus, focus on one thing and be good at it, and then tell my second daughter the same thing would just be like a disservice to both of them. And follow your creativity is what I would say. Follow what you're curious about and be endlessly curious. And if you do that, you'll discover your passions. And when you discover your passions, you have an opportunity to monetize them or not. You could write poetry and never publish. Some companies develop and create and are successful, and some are just, plugging along. But you got to love them each as though you love them completely. And eventually you sell them. Let's say, for example, I've started and sold 7 companies in 7 different industries. So that's interesting. I was interested the whole time until I was not interested anymore. And then they graduated. And just like kids, they go off to college and they have their next life. And I track them and I support them and I cheer for them, but I'm not responsible for them anymore. And I think that's the core of leadership, that you're responsible for the people, for the organization, and for the growth. Some companies deserve to grow and scale, and they can, and some companies are small and there's nothing wrong with them, and they're modest and they're lifestyle businesses because that's the lifestyle that the owner and the team operating that company choose. So I just find the answer to this question of focus, 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 which you see in every business book, all the coaches out there, 80, 20, et cetera. It does not reflect the infinite creativity of humanity. It does not reflect my sense of no limits. But within the confines of my upbringing, my beliefs, my passions, my curiosity, why should I focus, focus, focus and squish that? I think instead I should use it as a superpower and go discover, discover, discover. And then in the end, I've failed a lot and I've succeeded compared to what? What are you comparing yourself to when you're talking about success, and what really is failure? So all these things, when you start to delayer them and unpack them, I believe that we are unlimited beings choosing to live in a world that is about experiencing limits, life, death, all the cycles that we know of. So everything is got some form of a natural limit. And most of the time, I think we put those limits on ourselves. They really don't exist. We just are experiencing what it feels like to be limited. So that's what I say when someone says focus, focus, focus. I'll say, until I've become an expert, now I'm bored and I'm going to go do something else.
That's awesome. And I'm sure you've met a lot of parallel entrepreneurs, working with them over the years, or maybe there's one you really admire that's doing great things out there. Does anybody come to mind that you really think about when you ponder about this?
I think that my hero is the single working mother in America who manages to hold it all together in one way or another. That's my hero. Um,
So
the
they're
su-
also parallel entrepreneurs, just in their own way.
well, they're paralleling, right? They're doing what their internal compass and their identity and their priority and their passions is causing them to do with their life energy, and they're choosing, and they're also managing to figure out how to make ends meet. So I like to say they're paralleling. I think um, I've met some amazing parallel entrepreneurs. I've interviewed a number of them on the podcast, and I'd say that I admire each of them for a different reason. But starting with their core values, how they put together organizations and how they view problem solving. I'm learning something new every time I get a guest on the podcast and get to tell their story. It reinforcing something that I believe, some discovery about myself and some discovery about these leaders, that I think, I'll write a book someday and I'll try to capture that. But gosh, these people don't give up on themselves. They often don't give up on you, members of their team. They operate with a really firm, not a rigid, but a firm sense of core values, and they're not afraid to fail. I think they have pushed fear motivation further away from their decision and problem solving approaches, and moved more towards, I love this problem, I love this customer, I love this industry, I love working with these people in order to solve and create opportunity. So I think that those are the core elements of what I would find admirable in other entrepreneurial leaders. And I've just been focusing on parallel entrepreneurs lately. There's certainly uh, some of those same characteristics at work in other people, who might be listening, that are running just one company and happy as hell doing it.
So just to break down the word a little bit more, so to be a parallel entrepreneur means that you might be working on a few different things, but they're all somehow like the vector is going in the same direction, or somehow they're related. Can you kind of expand on that a little bit?
Well, most people who are paralleling and trying to run more than one business can do context switching more successfully within the context of a marketing business also has a research business, or a roofing company also has a maybe a solar company. A construction company might also have a marketing company. All of a sudden, now you're departing from some obvious, but they're problem solving. They're construction company owners who recognize they have a customer acquisition objective that they can be really good at, and they can sell that service to other construction company owners. I've got one dear friend, Michael Peters, was a guest of my last episode of the Parallel Entrepreneur, and he's got a global superpower company in the cybersecurity space, doing audits, et cetera. And he's using AI and infrastructure and 30 some years of experience to use his processes and understanding and turn it into a software subscription company, and opening up his competitive advantage to all of his competitors. There's an example of parallel entrepreneurship. Um, yeah, I think I've addressed your question.
Yeah, for sure. So you've had a chance to travel all over the world. So what are some of the interesting stories that you have? Anything in particular that you have that's fascinating?
Wow. I've been blessed to live a really adventure filled life. when I was your age, and I think that's one of the things that I'm so interested in, is when we met, I immediately recognized a parallel entrepreneur, and your stories helped confirm something that I believe, which is that the younger you are, the more likely you are to be a parallel entrepreneur. And you can solve many problems with micro SaaS services and different types of technologies, and create and produce music, and you can be in a lot of different spaces generating revenue and creating organizations. So I think that thesis is going to prove itself out. But when I was about your age, I had an opportunity to go to then the Soviet Union. It was in November, December of 1988, and I was the youngest member of a Rotary delegation sent there, pursuing the mission of negotiating with the government to allow independent gatherings of people, right? Organizing to pursue the Rotary values, which is service above self. And at the time, there wasn't much cultural understanding about what the power of gathering and focusing leaders on problems, including peace, and the four-way test, the Rotary four-way test of the things that we think, say, and do, installing those values of service above self, and organizing, getting the government to organize and allow Rotary International to be a part of that governmental system, right? So I'm in Moscow with this delegation, 35 Rotarians from all over the West Coast and Canada. My father was leading it, so I was sort of the youngest buck and having a great time. And I was a little bit more of a tourist than I was an ambassador, and I was hanging out with some Moscow University students, and it was snowing. I was having a ball, and I was inside the Kremlin, sort of on my own at one point. And I found through good fortune and circumstances, and next thing you know, I'm in the middle of a big square inside the beautiful stately structures of a snow-filled Kremlin, and across from the other side of this courtyard, walks straight into the courtyard, and nobody was in the courtyard, and there was armed guards all over the place. And I looked at that guy and I said, he looks important. I just trusted my instincts, and I just did a beeline, walked straight out into the middle of the courtyard and intercepted him. And I said, "Hello, my name's Mark Cleveland. I'm from the United States." And he looks at me. He's got this cool Russian cap on his hat, and we're all bundled up, and he's a little shorter than me. So he looks up, he says, "What state are you from?" And I said, "I'm from Oregon." He said, "'Tis a beautiful country. My name is Anatoly Dubin, and I am foreign ambassador to the United States." And I just said, "Cool." So, I was, in that moment in time, our delegation had been frustrated, and most of our appointments had been canceled, and we were not successful in our mission, and we were dejected and bummed out. I called over my travel companion, Paul Altrocki, who was the president of the Bend Rotary Club. And Paul walked over, and I said, "I want to introduce you to the ambassador." And he said, "Why are you here?" to me. And I said, "Well, we're trying to expand Rotary into Russia. We're having problems." And I'm describing it to him. He's listening. Dr. Altrocki walks up, and I introduce him, and Dr. Altrocki says, "Well, Ambassador, I have a letter for you." And he reached in his pocket and pulled out a letter and handed it to him. He said, "Is it addressed to me?" And Dr. Altrocki said, "Yes, it is." "Yes, sir." He said, "Then I will read it." So we took pictures next to the famous Liberty Bell, equivalent in the square that was not too far away, and we shook hands and parted ways. The very next day, every appointment that had been canceled in our week-long, frustrating, dejecting experience in Moscow was reset. And every appointment that we had scheduled was kept. And I believe that had I not followed my instincts and had I not just done what made sense to me at that moment, and I believe there are so many things that happen that are inspired, maybe our higher self or God, maybe the creator is reaching out to make change happen through each one of us. That's the moment in time when I realized I can do anything. Individual actions matter. I am a contributor all the time to everything, and I'm an instrument. My steps are laid out for me, and I should just have faith and not act in fear. Now, the context of where we were at that moment in time and why it was such a frustrating experience is that Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia were voting to secede from the Soviet Union on that week in the Duma at that moment in time. And there was a lot of political unrest and uncertainty and fear permeating everything. And a lot of people's priorities were certainly not on this group of Rotarians visiting from the United States, but handing the ambassador that letter and telling him what our problem was, that chance encounter changed the course of Rotary International. I think contributed to changing the course of our relations with other business people and servants globally. So I'm proud of that.
That's awesome. Such a great story. And for anyone who doesn't know history, so you were there in '88, you said?
Yeah, November and December of '88.
So just about 2.5, 3 years later was the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991. That's actually the year my family immigrated from St. Petersburg to Philadelphia. And so, yeah, did you get a feeling when you were there that, I mean, you're mentioning it, there was a lot of political tension going on. Was there like a collapse in the air, or was things kind of like business as usual while you were there?
Well, I don't know that I'm a good judge of that, but since then I've had a lot of friends from Russia and from other parts of that world, Lithuania, etc. I think a few people came and visited from Russia. We had a foreign exchange student come live with us who we met on that Rotary International project, and he was a member of the Spetsnaz and became an activist and was a part of that revolution. I think the people ultimately demand and must be heard. And when that culture was controlled and oppressed in the way that it was for so long, and what any country, what any organization, what any leader should take away from that moment is you don't know the end of the road is happening, except for every decision you're making is pushing the end closer. And people are freedom seeking, deserving of liberty, and the potential for a greater life in every country, everywhere. And so there's no room for tyranny. There's no room for dictatorship. And people have to take responsibility. And I think they did that in that moment in time. And I had a friend that was standing on one of those tanks in 1991, and people risked their lives. It's pretty amazing to imagine what they went through, and they deserve the credit. And we continue to have problems in every country where people have sort of surrendered their authority. They've outsourced their authority. They've decided that facts don't matter. We've found ways to criticize each other and to create and generate fear. And I think we're inspiring fear-based decisions these days way too often. And I love what the Soviet Union, now Russia, what those people did with their future at that time. And I just hope we all continue to learn from those episodes in history and stop repeating them.
Very well said. For the people who don't know, can you touch a little bit on what the Rotary is? Is it still active in Russia today? And like, after the fall of the Soviet Union, was it like, did they take a break and come back, or was their presence always there? And like, and expand a little bit about that.
Well, Rotary was started in Chicago by a man named Paul Harris, and I believe it was 1908, February. I want to say February 5th. And I've been a Rotarian for 35 years. We believe in the four-way test. I mentioned it earlier, which is, all about, is it the truth? That's the first question is what you're about to think, say, or do the truth? If it is, and you can pass on to the second question, is it fair to all concerned? And if the answer is yes, will it build, whatever you're going to do, will it build goodwill and better friendships? If the answer is yes, then the fourth question is it going to be beneficial to all concerned? And if you can pass the four-way test of Rotary, you can pretty much imagine that you should be able to do almost anything. Or if you can't pass that test, you shouldn't do it. And there were Rotary clubs throughout the world and in the former Soviet bloc countries before they became part of the Soviet Union. And they were all banned and disbanded. And we were adventuring at that time to try to participate in reestablishing the privilege of assembly. We take that right for granted here in the United States. And now today there's a Rotary Club in Moscow that we help charter. There's a Rotary Club in Khabarovsk, Irkutsk, St. Petersburg. There are Rotary clubs throughout the former Soviet bloc. And some of them were reorganized and revived, and some of them were created from scratch and found their own way to what service above self meant within that moment, in that city, in that country. And it's been a great thing to watch. And I think Rotary is in every country in the world now, if not every country. It's so close, I might as well be able to say that. And we have a common, I think 1.3 million members globally, and we have common understandings of what's right and what works as you are trying to engage in business and civic service. And I'm thinking that it's a great place to make friends and build relationships.
That's awesome. I'm gonna have to check out where the nearest one is over here. Maybe
It's the Miami Rotary Club. There's quite a few down there. You'll be entertained.
Okay, cool. Maybe next time you're here, we could go to one together. What do you think?
I love it.
So tell the people where they can find you. What are you working on now? Where can people learn more about Mark Cleveland?
Well, I have a website. I guess there's a starting point, markacleveland.com. My passion is the Parallel Entrepreneur Project. My day job, my focus, and I spend a lot of time in Miami doing economic development, working with our friend Francisco Gonzalez in the Miami Club. That's how we met. And I have some clients down there because it's a fascinating, globally oriented, creative community. And so I spend my time during the day at a company I'm a managing director at a company called Kensington Park Capital. And we are sell-side advisors for entrepreneurs that want to sell their companies. So Kensington Park Capital is where I get to take all my experience as an entrepreneur who sold companies and bought and sold companies to private equity and really work with a fantastically experienced team and help someone else achieve their dream. It's the biggest decision you might ever make for many people, is that decision to sell your company. And I help you get an optimal outcome. So yeah, it's been a lot of fun. It's creative because every time I get a new client, they're in a brand new industry doing something that I may or may not have done before, but I've got good skills in that context switching area. Business is business, Daniel. It almost doesn't matter what business you're in, how you approach customer service, delivering value, being fair, how you treat your people. These are all, I think, very, very common practices. Whether you're in a business that's something that's immediately familiar to you, and you've started a second one that's in the adjacent space that is easy for you to justify, or you're doing what I did. I had a sock manufacturing company and a hobby manufacturing company at the same time. And a little bit later, I had a short sea shipping company that I'd started with a team. So yeah, you can find me on all the socials. I'm having fun just sharing what I'm learning.
And you could also check out the parallelentrepreneur.com. I'll have some links on the screen for people. I know you're always open to meeting new and interesting people who are working on great things. So happy to send a few people your way. And we still have so much to talk about. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Next time you come on, I want to go through each one of your 8 businesses one by one and break them down. I think that'd be kind of cool. But yeah, thanks so much for jumping on with me. Really appreciate it, and looking forward to seeing you soon.
Well, go out there and keep creating, Daniel.
Thanks so much, Mark. Appreciate it. Take care.